What you can't, this is important to clarify, you cannot vote twice. So if you request an absentee ballot, you can receive an absentee ballot, you can possess an absentee ballot that's not completed. I can hold on to my absentee ballot and then choose ultimately that I want to vote one of those other two ways. I can go in person on election day, or I can go to an early voting site. In that case, my absentee ballot, I need to rip it up. It's null, it's void, it can't be used. But I have it. So if I choose to submit it, I can. If you vote twice, that is a felony. Do not vote twice. So if you send in your absentee ballot, you have voted. Do not go to vote either early in person or on election day. You can only vote once. A few things. One more thing I wanted to talk about voting twice. And again, that's illegal. Don't do it. And some people may wonder, just kind of logistically, how does the state prevent people from voting twice? So one thing is, all ballots are retrievable. They're marked with numbers. My absentee ballot has a little sticker on it with my name and my address and my precinct, and then there's a little approval number or application number, I'm not sure, and then a ballot. So they have numbers to track it. When I send it in, I will then be removed from the poll book. So I'll be removed as someone who's eligible to vote if I show up in person. So they note that they have all the absentee ballots before election day, and on election day, anyone they've received an absentee ballot for will be removed from the poll books. So if you show up to your voting site on election day, you won't be in the poll book because they will have, if they've already received your absentee ballot. Again, that's different than if I haven't, that's only if you've submitted your absentee ballot. If your absentee ballot is in the mail, right, then they'll be looked at on election day. They'll be looked at when they're received after election day. So we can talk a little bit more about any concerns people have about voting twice, or if you're worried that your mail-in ballot didn't get counted. We can talk about that as well. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of the politics of all this before we open it up for questions. So absentee ballots have become politicized as anything can today. I mean, one of the lessons of this is just any topic that you can think of can become politicized especially in today's polarized U.S. politics. So absentee ballot voting has become somewhat polarized and politicized. And so we'll talk a little bit about why that is and kind of what the upshot of that is. So because of the pandemic, more voters have expressed an interest in voting by mail. Don't want to go wait in line and risk exposure or risk spreading COVID-19. Voting officials, election officials anticipated this, and so wanted to ramp up their ability to process absentee ballots and meet the needs of the voters. There was at some point in April or May, President Trump had one of his tweet storms where he expressed a lot of skepticism about mail-in voting and the potential for fraud that it could create. And because of that, and other Republican officials kind of have echoed that sentiment since then. So for two reasons, there are now kind of expected partisan differences in willingness or interest in using absentee ballots. So one is that there's some evidence that Democratic voters, people who lean towards the Democratic Party, are taking the pandemic more seriously and restricting their activity more so than Republican-leaning people. So because of that, there's some evidence to suggest that Democratic voters are more likely to make use of absentee ballots in this election than in a typical year. In a typical year, there's no partisan advantage for any party for absentee ballots. It's pretty much the same for both parties. But this year, there's some expectation that absentee mail-in votes will disproportionately go towards Democrats, because Democrats are both taking the pandemic more seriously, and plus absentee ballots themselves became somewhat politicized when President Trump criticized them and other Republicans criticized them. So surveys suggest that Republican voters are more skeptical of absentee ballots and express less interest in using absentee ballots. So because of that, because there's this expected difference in absentee ballots and how they'll fall one way or the other, especially this year, there are a couple of things going on. One is there are efforts to suggest that absentee voting is not secure and makes voting fraud possible. And then the other thing is there's concern about whether the volume of absentee ballots will either overwhelm the mail, the USPS, or election officials who have to process the votes, and whether all those votes will get counted. Whether questions about fraud or questions about signatures matching and stuff like that will cause more of the absentee ballots to get thrown out. And then questions about whether we'll know the election results on election day itself, or whether this high volume of votes that are mailed in will be counted after election day, and there'll be a shift in what seemed to be the outcome on election day, and whether that will cause people to be have less confidence in the legitimacy of the election. So each of those in turn. One, the voter fraud. There is minimal evidence of voter fraud, and there is evidence of people who have tried to double vote, and they have been caught and they have been prosecuted. So don't double vote. Voter fraud basically doesn't exist. There, of course, was the incident in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District a couple of years ago, where there was someone who was harvesting absentee ballots and collecting them, which was illegal, and he got elected, and they were potentially playing around with the absentee ballots, but they got caught. So, but voter fraud doesn't really happen much at all. Especially there's just minimal evidence of it. The second thing is this idea that the system will be overwhelmed and whether all absentee ballots will be counted. North Carolina State Board of Elections is expressing with as much confidence as you could expect them to, that they will be able to process all this stuff. So they have ramped up their efforts. They feel confident in their ability to process even 30 to 40% of ballots coming in through absentee ballots. So they're prepared for this. They got money through the CARES Act to get more machines. They have plenty of people working for them. They are not sounding the alarm about the number of the logistics of processing these votes. The questions about whether there will be an effort to suppress some of these absentee votes, if you're careful and you make sure you have your signature and your signature matches, state boards of elections are very much nonpartisan and bipartisan organizations, so that they have a lot of measures in place to make sure that there's not one Democrat in a room by herself or one Republican in a room by herself doing this and throwing out all the voters from the other party. So they've thought about this before, and they have many procedures in place to keep that from happening. That said, if they have a lot of absentee ballots with deficiencies that they have to process, there could be some people whose ballots don't get counted because they've waited until October 27th to request an absentee ballot, and then they sent it in and they didn't have a witness signature. There's just not a lot of time for that to get processed and for the voter to be informed that, oh, there's a problem with your ballot, particularly if there's a high volume. So I don't think there would be anything insidious going on with that. Nothing systematic. But again, if you wait to the last minute and you're dealing, with mail and there's an error, some sort of deficiency with the ballot, there are people who believe that they vote by absentee mail-in every year. They have some sort of deficiency. They send it in late and it doesn't get counted. So it's possible there, given the volume of absentee ballots, there will probably be more of them this year. But there's no real evidence that there's anything systematically, going on to try to keep people from voting. Then the other thing is this idea of this, you'll hear the term blue shift. Maybe you've already heard this, is that especially in California in the past, but over the country as a whole this year, there's an expectation that the mail-in absentee ballots will be disproportionately Democratic. So what that could potentially mean is that in states where there are close elections, on election night, when the media is reporting election totals for a state, they report those numbers before 100% of the votes are in, just so you know. But as they start reporting them, as of midnight, it's possible that you'll have states where, for instance, Donald Trump is up by 13,000 votes in Michigan as of midnight Eastern time on November 3rd. It's possible, and Michigan doesn't count its mail-in votes until after Election Day. So it's possible then that when Michigan counts its absentee mail-in ballots in the next couple of days, it's possible that if those votes are disproportionately Democratic, and if that difference is more than 13,000 votes, it's possible that you'll see a shift where Donald Trump was up 13,000 votes as of midnight on election night with 80% of ballots counted. But then once you count all the absentee ballots, if there are 15,000, if Joe Biden has an advantage of 15,000 votes among those absentee ballots, then the election, switches, and there's this blue shift toward the Democratic Party, which is often denoted with the blue color. So that's possible that could happen. That's just the way elections work. But there's some concern that if that happens in multiple states, or if it gets promoted and politicized too much, you could have some kind of unrest out in the streets. So that's something else to be on the lookout for. So again, I tried to run through just kind of the logistics of absentee ballots and of voting in general in North Carolina. Talk a little bit about the procedures for how that works and how it's secure. Don't handle other people's absentee ballots. Don't vote twice. Those are the two most important things to learn from today. And then I wanted to also, talk a little bit about the politics of these absentee ballots as well. So, and I know I want to leave time for questions, and we don't have a long time anyway. So
yes, if people can stay a little bit longer, that's great. But I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay, will you handle questions, Emily? Because
I got you.
Okay.
So if we don't get to your question today, Jen Martz is going to put in my contact information, her contact information. Feel free to email us, and we can field those questions as well. So one of the things that came up in the chat box is can I vote by mail if I want to be a poll worker?
Yes. Every voter has all the ways open to them to vote. So if you're a poll worker, you can vote early. I mean, if you're going to be working the polls as an early voter, you know where to go, you know how everything works. So you can do that, or you can do it on election day, or you can do an absentee mail-in ballot.
And that also kind of transitioned us into, can the absentee ballot be signed by a witness who lives in the same household?
Yes. Yeah. Your witness, I have a wife. My wife could be my witness if I wanted to complete my absentee ballot and send it in.
Perfect. How do you think that this will affect minority voters?
So I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that there are huge differences in amount of mail-in voting by race or ethnicity. There's been some speculation about whether older voters will be more likely to do mail-in voting because of their increased susceptibility to complications from COVID. So it's hard to see. My advice to anyone who wants to make sure that their vote is counted would be just to do this early, right? If you're concerned about going in person because of the pandemic, or you can't for some reason, mail-in voting is secure, right? And it's very likely it's just going to be just fine, and your ballot will count, and you can track it and all that sort of thing. If you do it early, any of those extra complications that can throw your ballot off are things that can be remedied. So if you forgot to sign it, if your witness didn't sign it, if your signature, is different from, when you tried to sign it online, and then there's some election officials like, oh, these are two different signatures. If you send in your ballot, if I have my ballot now and I mail it in today, and there's a problem with it, the Board of Elections will let me know that your vote hasn't been cast, and I can try to remedy it in some way. Again, if I wait and I request it on October 27th, then I receive it on, best case scenario, October 28th, and then mail it back in, and they get it, on October 20th. I mean, that's the fastest it can possibly be. And that seems a little bit unreasonable to me. You can't remedy, and you can't vote after election day. So if there's a problem with your ballot, it needs to get addressed on or before election day, because they're not going to allow you to cast a ballot on November 4th. So I think it's equally secure to vote by mail-in ballot, and it's going to count. There are a couple extra things that can potentially go wrong with the mail-in vote, but it's unlike, if you're careful, you can make sure they don't happen. They're unlikely to happen, and if you do it early, you can fix them if there's a problem.
All right, and one last quick question before we wrap up for the day. Will they be counting, and you kind of already touched on this, but will they be counting ballots as they come in or on election day? So I know that there's a little bit of a space that you can still send in your ballots November 6th, but will they be counting those ballots as they come in or on election day?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was looking at the other questions to see if there's anything else I try to answer more than one question if I can. I'm sorry,
That's perfectly
Emily.
fine. Will they be counting ballots as they come in or on election day?
So when the ballots come in, they note that they have them, but they do not tabulate them until after election day or on election. No, they tabulate them on election day in North Carolina. So any of the early mail-in voting, they have them. They make sure, we got our absentee ballot from Emily Sears, take her off the poll books, all that kind of stuff. But they don't actually tabulate your vote until election day itself. But on election day, they'll tabulate all the absentee mail-in ballots that they've gotten before election day. And those will be the first numbers that they release to the press or on their website. Will be, our mail-in votes show, whatever for all of the races, not just presidential race. Of course, there are 39 other races on the Mecklenburg County ballot.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We did say we were going to try to keep these to 30 minutes. Obviously, there's so much more that we could talk about, but thank you so much, Dr. Houck, for sharing this information with us. Again, for people who have questions that didn't get answered, Jen is going to put our information in the chat box, so feel free to email us at any time, and we can help you figure things out. Also, if you are interested in joining us for further webinars like this one, you can also email us as well, and we can send you the link to sign up. Next week, we are going to have Dr. Eric Heberlig from UNC Charlotte, and he is going to be talking about, does my vote actually count, the Electoral College, and why you need to vote. So please join us at noon next Tuesday for this event. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you again, Dr. Houck.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Everybody have a good day.